Alright, let's start 7:05 on the dot. I'm a punctual guy.
If you were punctual, wouldn't it be 7 on the dot?
No, because
It's
you get
MIT
5
time.
minutes. Yeah, sure, we'll say that. MIT time.
Nice.
I was at this tech startup fair thing the other week, and they had some insane startups doing crazy talks. But they had this one talk that was really good. It was how to stop technical debt and stuff like that. And it was really good, but the speakers were insane. The first speaker went to Vanderbilt, and he worked at Google and Microsoft, but good internships. Second guy was unbelievable. He worked at he went to MIT. He worked at Facebook Research, Google Research, and then Jane Street. It's what?
Alright, so it is 7:05. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to this panel of discussion about the grind for internships. Today, me, Laila, and Ryan will be talking a bit more about our experiences with internships, with interviews, with applying to jobs, how to land an internship, how to make yourself stand out, etc. As I know, the grind for summer internships is beginning to ramp up, obviously, in the month of February. Everyone that I know that is looking for work has been applying nonstop for the summer co-op term or just for summer in general. So today, me, Ryan, and Layla will try to give you maybe a few tips, tricks, ways for you to make yourself stand out and, really put yourself out there towards recruiters, towards hiring managers, towards team managers that might, look at your profile or look at your resume at some point when you apply for whatever company that you choose to apply for. So I'll get started off and then I'll pass it off to Ryan and Layla. But one of the biggest questions that I get when when I apply to internships or when people ask me how I landed my internships is, what does your resume look like? Countless amount of people have asked me, what does your resume look like? How did you format your resume? Did you, do anything special to your resume to make it parse well, etc.? No, not really. To be honest, all I did was I just created a simple resume on LaTeX, which is pretty simple if you search up Overleaf and have a million different templates that you can use from. And I simply just added the information that I already had from other resumes, such as my work experience. Now, the one thing to note when you're applying for tech internships, it's probably one of the best things that you can do to make yourself stand out. And I've noticed this not applicable in as many people that I've done resume critiques for, is adding metrics. What I mean by adding metrics is making sure that you add percentages or time or some sort of numerical data to your points that you've stated in your resume. So for example, if you've worked at a company and you helped their product or their feature go from 2 minutes of parsing information to 5 seconds, make sure you include that in your resume. Metrics stand out not only to recruiters, but they also stand out to the hiring managers that look at your portfolio, that look at your resumes. It's one of the best ways for them to really gauge and understand your portfolio and the work that you've done. Because a lot of the times you can, kind of just put fancy English words into your point on your resume, but it might not have any meaning at all to the work that you did, or the person that looking at your resume might not understand what is that statement supposed to mean. But when you add metrics to them, they know, okay, this person went from point X to point Y in this amount of time and improved this product in this amount of time. So that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed that help resumes get noticed more, is obviously adding metrics, adding numerical data to your work experience or to your projects or whatever work you might be doing. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be this feature or that feature. It can also be like when you talk about your TA experience or research experience, you can state that, I helped this many students with in this course, and I was responsible for these students, like 400 students, and making sure that they understood the material, etc. So there's various ways to add metrics, but it's really important that when you create a draft of your resume, you include metrics within them so that when a person looks at your resume, they understand, oh, he did this and he helped improved. He was responsible for this many people, so that shows responsibility or leadership. Or he he did this work on this project, which helped improve this functionality. Another thing that I've noticed on the topic of resumes is that many people will come, with obviously different types of resumes. Some people come up with some people come up with a double column resume. Some people come with a traditional resume. All of those various resumes are completely okay to have. But the one thing you want to make sure is how does that resume parse into Workday or um, whichever other platforms you can use for applying to jobs. You want to make sure that it parses well enough that if you need to make changes, you can make little changes. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that it parses well enough that all your data that you have in your resume gets transferred over efficiently, because you don't want to constantly be filling out application after application, just copy pasting. What's another thing? Layla, Ryan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so we thought we would kind of do this like first we'll talk about resumes and then technical interviews and behavioral interviews. And then we can add on anything else and answer some questions. But yeah, I think you mentioned some really good points there. I think something that just came to mind was because you're trying to do some like small changes to your resume, but for most of the time it's mostly mass applying to different places, places like LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, things like that. It definitely can be a numbers game for sure. Like I think Wahid and I were just talking about this. I do want to put in the chat here something that I've been using. It's called Simplify. It's an extension that you just put in your information once and it'll autofill any other future resume applications, which definitely cuts down time when you're applying, especially when you're applying to like hundreds of positions at a time. So I put that in the chat if anyone wants to check that out. I think it's been really helpful for me. In terms of resume, I think Abdul hit on like most of the biggest things. Make sure that also like this kind of relates to resume, but I would say that your resume should definitely have the metrics and the most important things that you think are relevant to the position. If you are in a situation where you have more relevant experience to add, like maybe push it up. So if you're applying to like data analyst jobs and software engineering jobs, if you've had experience with both, maybe in research or a previous internship or even a project, you can kind of rearrange those to see what would fit best for the position you're applying for. But make sure your LinkedIn has absolutely everything and in as much detail as possible, like even include job positions that don't have anything to do with computer science. I think you can never have too much information on LinkedIn. Simplify, make sure that, like Abdul said, numbers and quantify your kind of what your impact has been in that place. I don't know, Ryan, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is that the resume gets you the interview. So it has to be easily machine readable, parsable by like machines and like all those like fancy systems that companies use and stuff like that. Because some companies don't have like boxes for you to fill in the data yourself. And it has to be nicely readable by a hiring manager, because once it gets through the phase where a robot looks over it, a person looks over it. So you want it to be nice for a person to read as well. Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, that's. I did also want to mention, like, if you can have more than one person look over your resume for some feedback, I think it's nice to get some different opinions, because everyone has a different way of wording things or different perspectives, and they have their own experiences. So I got Abdul to look at mine, and I got a bunch of other people as well to put in their input, and I kind of took the aggregate of all of that advice, which I think really helped, because people just when they're applying to their own positions notice some things that think they've helped them, or even hear things from recruiters that they think is beneficial. So the more opinions, I think, the better.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Okay, did we want to, I don't know, Abdul, did you want to move on to technical interviews?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So usually, from my experience at least, you will have, when you say you've applied and you've gotten a nice email from a recruiter saying, hey, we liked your portfolio, we want to move on to the interview stage. Now, the interview stage can be a bit daunting, and it depends really on the company and, how well known is that company, what is the work that that company does, etc. Usually in your interviews, you'll have between 1 to 3 interviews, depending on the role. Usually for internships, it's just 1 interview. But I've seen interns have 3 interviews. I've seen some interns have just 1 interview. I've seen some interns have 6 interviews. So it's really team dependent and it's really company dependent as well. The main thing is that usually your interviews will be split. So you'll have half behavioral interviews and half technical interviews. Your technical interviews can be a mix. They can be strictly coding, or they can be strictly questions. So what I mean by that is obviously if it's strictly coding, it's something like LeakCode. So you're going to be given an IDE. You're going to be giving 45, maybe an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. You might be given 1 coding question, 2 coding questions, something that you might see similar to what's on LeakCode. And depending on the company, again, the difficulty will vary. Big companies usually will ask maybe a LeakCode medium. Smaller companies will tend to ask a LeakCode easy, and some companies won't even ask. So when companies don't ask about coding, that usually means that you should expect technical questions about the work that they do. So, for example, a question that I had when I was interviewing with NVIDIA was about um, various different types of hardware and how does gaming affect those hardware, etc. So I didn't have any coding in one round, and it was just questions about hardware. How would the hardware affect gaming? How would you how do settings in games affect the hardware, etc. So you can expect a technical round like that. Usually those technical, so you'll have one with the software engineer and you'll have one with the hiring manager. And your software engineer will either be full technical questions or it'll be coding. Your hiring manager is where you'll have the behavioral, usually the behavioral questions where they'll just ask you about the company, why do you want to join the company, etc. And then the best way, I think, personally, to prep for technical coding interviews is obviously, I would say, LeakCode. And I know people, like, you might have watched tons of interviews, like, on YouTube, etc. Everyone says, oh, just do LeakCode. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have the right fundamentals in data structures and algorithms, LeakCode is simply just a puzzle. And the more you practice LeakCode, the more better you get at solving those puzzles quicker and more efficiently. So that's 2 things that I would say. So make sure your fundamentals in data structures and algorithms is, really on point. Obviously, if you're in first year, you haven't taken that course yet. But if you're in second or third year, or even fourth year, you have taken that course. So if you need to, make sure you review the notes for that course, or make sure you review the topics that you learned in that course. And there's a lot of resources online. My personal favorite when I need to review data structures and algorithm is probably the MIT courseware, which is free. Probably one of the it's really old lecture series, but it's such an informative lecture series that teaches you everything about data structures. If you have no idea, it'll teach you everything about the structures and algorithms. And then when it comes to the other ladder of technical interviews where, you need to answer questions, technical related questions to your position, make sure you study the job description and the job page of when you apply to it. Usually in that, they'll state all the various technologies and they'll tell you the type of work that you might be doing, what type of person they're looking for. So expect questions along those lines. And when you're doing a behavioral interview, expect questions about the company, about what type of work does the company do. You should have a response to why you want to join that company. What does product is the company doing that is like to, etc. Ryan, Layla, want to jump in?
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Ryan. No
Okay,
worries.
perfect. Yeah, so technical interviews are always tricky. So I always like to do research beforehand. So I look at what does the company do? What kind of stuff do they do? What are their mission statement? What are their goals? This works for both technical and behavioral interviews. And then from there, I drill into specifics. So we'll look on Glassdoor, like interviews and like interview reviews, stuff like that. Because people for positions like felt like, oh, I interviewed, it was a positive experience, I didn't get the job, stuff like that. And they list about what their experience was. This doesn't work for all companies. Some companies like Tesla or like Facebook, they make you sign NDAs for interviewing and stuff like that. So they keep it very hush-hush, very secret. But, I try to do as much research and preparation beforehand. Knowing what you're going into, it really helps you get a leg up over what other people do. And at the end of the day, they're people too. And so, technical interviews aren't 100% technical like everyone says that they are. They're really behavioral in disguise. If you show off that you're smart, but you ask good questions and stuff like that, then they might take an interest to you. For example, I had an interview. I did very poorly technically, but I asked a lot of questions and I engaged with my interviewer, and it worked very well. I moved on to the next round.
Yeah, those are some great points to add on to that. So you mentioned doing some research. I think that's a really good place to start. Typically, when you get notice that you're moving on to a technical round of interviews, you don't have that much time to prepare. So you really do want to take advantage of the time that you do have to make sure that you're focusing on the most important things. So doing some Glassdoor research, there's almost always a common area of focus for each company. So Microsoft, for example, loves strings. A lot of their questions are string related. So sorry if there's background noise, but research is definitely really important because then it narrows down where to start. And then from there, what I did was I went on to LeakCode, like Abdul mentioned, and there are packages for specific companies, not all of them, but those are typically the ones, especially the editor's choice, it'll mention these are most commonly asked in an interview. So those are the ones that you really want to narrow down on, especially if you're low on time. And then from there, what you want to do is practice not just the question, because that's only one instance of a larger foundation. Make sure that you really understand why the question is being answered that way, why that approach is the most optimal solution, and making sure that you really understand the fundamentals of the data structures and algorithms. So LeakCode, making sure that you know the fundamentals. I can give some background information about how my technical interview went. So it was 2 rounds in the same day. The first one, absolutely killed it. Not in a good way. I butchered it. It was so bad. I think I was nervous. And that's another thing to keep in mind in a technical interview. They really are focusing more on your thought process. So and it was even said to me in the second round, the recruiter or the manager said, to me, it's a plus that you can code. So what they're looking for is someone who knows how to think critically and knows how to ask the right questions. And then from there, if you're a good communicator, you can work on a team, making sure that you take whatever suggestions they give you and incorporate it into your answer somehow, because whenever they give you a hint or they ask you a question, it's because they're trying to lead you in a certain situation or path. So make sure you take that into consideration and think about it. So the first one I don't think went that well. The second one, make sure you go in mentally prepared and confident. This is a learning experience at the end of the day, so you don't want to trip or choke because you're nervous, because that it could be a really great opportunity to just learn a bit more about yourself. So what I did was the first thing you do when you see the question is think out loud. So any thoughts that you have, put them into coherent thought and just spit them out. So think, okay, when I first see this question, my initial thought is to do a for loop or to run through it iteratively. And even if the solution isn't optimal, just say what you're thinking. From there, they'll typically help guide you to a more optimal solution. Or if you end up thinking of one, you can say it out and then say, but instead, I think I'll take a more optimal solution and use a stack instead. So something like that. And then make sure that you're explaining what you're coding. You can do it either before, during, or after you write the line. Sometimes it can be hard to multitask, especially if you're trying to think at the same time. So I guess like a transparent thought process is probably the most like run it through like orally, like just talk it out, and then run through a bunch of edge cases. Make sure you include those as well. So that was kind of my experience. The manager I was interviewing with also said something that I really liked. He asked me how the first interview went, and I told him I think it was really bad, to be honest. Like, I think I was just nervous, but I'm feeling a bit more confident now. And he said good software developers don't dwell on the past. So just make sure that anytime you're presented with a new opportunity, take it as an opportunity to learn, and don't really think about everything that could go wrong, I guess, because you don't want to be nervous. It's just a good experience at the end of the day. So I went on for a bit there, but if anyone has anything to add.
I think Layla nailed on the coffin, and obviously she's talking from experience. And I you would expect any technical interview at any big company, believe it or not, from LeakCode questions to communicating effectively to making sure you understand the questions. There's one thing I did want to add on is the thought process that you have when you do a technical interview or when you do a technical LeakCode question is you never want to jump into it right away into coding. You kind of want to pace yourself. Obviously, there is stages to the questions, so you first want to read the statement or problem statement that you're given, ask questions about that problem statement, okay, and make sure they're questions that could lead you in the right direction. So, for example, if the question might be asking about like hash maps or something, don't ask them if you can use a linked list, right? It just doesn't make sense. Essentially, you want to make sure you ask the right questions, which will obviously lead you into the right direction. And even before you start coding, coding should be the last thing you do in a technical interview. You should make sure that once you've asked those questions, you explain to them what type of code, what code you're going to write, and what's the format of the code going to look like. So what's going to happen first, where your loop going to go, what's the data structure that you're going to be using, etc. You lay out everything to them, and when they give you the all clear, then you start coding. And when you're coding, you still talk about your thought process. Hey, this line is doing this, and I need it because for this reason to get this value, and this loop is doing this because I need it to do whatever it needs to do to utilize the data structure, etc. And finally, at the end, like Layla said, obviously you test it, make sure you run. Sometimes you won't have enough time to run a full test. Like you won't usually interviewers won't make you execute the code. It'll just be, oh, if I put this value into your function, what will happen, right? And you explain to them that this the line of code will do this, that line of code will do that, etc., and so forth. Yeah, I think Layla nailed it on the coffin of how technical interviews go and how to prepare for them, and how does a technical interview look like. Obviously, for my position, it was similar, but I had a split. Like I said before, I had a split. Like, so the first half of my interview was just technical questions in the sense about hardware, etc., and the latter half more of coding and understanding if I can code to with the technology that the team utilizes. And yeah, usually it's one of those two. Pray that you get just questions because it's much easier to prepare for questions than to prepare for coding. I think coding does take a lot more time and effort and practice to be good at it. But yeah, and then I guess we can jump into how each one of us landed our positions at our respective companies. Um,
Real quick, sorry,
Yeah.
Jeremy, did you want us to turn off our cameras because I think it's getting close to the capacity, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you guys could turn
Okay.
off your cameras, then that'd
Cool.
be, yeah.
Oh, we got a question from Hardware. What resources would you recommend for just questions? Personally, I think preparing for just questions is a bit difficult.
Mhm.
But I think it goes back to preparation. So you have to look at what the company does. what the team you're applying for is, stuff like that. And a big one that gives a lot of information is the job posting itself. So a lot of times job postings can be a bit vague, but not all the time. And so looking over the job posting and trying to take as much information as you can from that. Now, if you go online and you search up like position, like let's say like networking engineer or like software developer, like typical interview questions, you would get a list of good interview questions. For example, I was interviewing for a network position, and the first thing I did when I heard that it was going to be like mostly like these kind of questions, I searched up networking engineer questions, and I got a big list of 100 questions, the kind of things that they ask, and very good responses, what people are really looking for. And so you really want to go over and study those. And between all of them, there is a common thread. Between most questions like that, they're not always looking for the most technical, perfect answer. Sometimes they are, and you can't really win those scenarios. But a lot of times they're looking for someone who can think through a process well and understand what's going on in the background.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the only time I searched up just questions was for the behavioral interview, and actually Abdul helped me with that a lot. Glassdoor is a great resource. I think sometimes even GitHub has, depending on the company, but they'll have resources. I think if you just search it up or even look for if you know anyone that's interviewed for the company before, like I know a lot of people use the careers and co-ops channel here that we have on the Discord, which is great because then you can ask if anyone else is interviewed and they can kind of give you their 2 cents. But yeah, for just questions, I guess Glassdoor would be a great, or just Google in general. Like if you're, like Ryan said, applying for something, a specific role, just search up that role and interview questions. And I'm sure a bunch of results will come up.
Yeah, to build on what Layla said about the careers and co-ops channel, is that the search function works really well, and a lot of time people they talk about their interviews after they had them, and so you can look at their experiences if they've written about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to really close this topic, the last point that I would add is if you get an interview and you want to learn more about the company, and say our careers co-op chat unfortunately doesn't have anyone that's ever interviewed with that company, there is external Discord servers that I'm part of that I've personally used, and they've actually genuinely helped me with my interviews. The first one being cscareers.dev.
Absolute god tier resource.
You've probably seen their, like, if you ever search up an interview, like say, Facebook interview 1x45, like 1 hour, one interview on Reddit, it'll pop up with that Reddit, subreddit, and it'll just be a bunch of different threads about maybe the same interview with that company, and what did people expect, how did it go, etc. And even in that Discord itself, you can expect many people to be talking about the interview, or you can hey, put in the chat, hey, I have this interview coming up, has anyone interviewed? And you'll definitely get responses from a various amount of people, because that Reddit is that Discord server is like partnered with Discord, and it's massively large. So there's, I think, over 10,000 people in that Discord. And yeah, when I was applying to internships and jobs for full time, I was very active on that Discord, because to get information about the different types of interviews and how they're conducted with various company. And I noticed for every company I asked, big or small, there would be someone, at least maybe 5 people that have done some sort of interview with them, and they could help me and guide me in terms of what I need to learn, what type of questions I should expect, etc. And
Yeah,
not just for interviews, you can expect you can use it for like looking for actual jobs. Like they post links, they have their own GitHub repository that they have linked, which has various internships. You can use it for um, you know negotiating salaries. If you land an internship and you think that I want to negotiate the salary, how do I do it? You can use that server for that, etc. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, to add to what Abdul was saying, is on that server they have a really good bot that is probably not legal, the LeakCode bot, and it you like put in the company and it tells you like what Layla said before, but like the paid LeakCode version, they do the exact same thing for free. And unlike the LeakCode version where you have to pay and it's curated, this one is curated from the LeakCode website as well as user submitted. For example, like let's say I interview at like Google, and I get a question that was not on the LeakCode thing on this server, Discord server. I would like tell the bot that I interviewed, and this was the question that they asked, and they would add it to their list of interview questions.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, that list will tell you the most frequently asked questions by X company. So say I'm applying to Amazon, it'll say Amazon asked, say like Tucson, 484 times in the past 6 months. So you can gauge what type of question you might get from what type of company based off, using that bot itself. Okay. Anyone have any questions that they want to ask?
Someone sent me a question. Someone asked, what is the best time to start applying if we want to land a position for the summer? That's a very good question. So that question is a bit trickier because it depends on the company size. For example, very big companies, your Googles, your Facebooks, your Amazons, they hire 8 months in advance. For full-time, it can go up to a year in advance. And their process is known for being very lengthy and very arduous and having a lot of interviews. But for smaller companies, let's say like Shopify, like BlackBerry, Nokia, like a lot of startups, they only do 4 months in advance. So if you want a position for the summer at a startup, you start applying in December and January. If you want a position at one of the big NFANG companies, you start applying in August or September.
Yep. General, what I usually use as a rule of thumb is most people say to apply 4 months before. I recommend 6 to 7 months before. And yeah, it's like even now you can apply, and there's many internships still on LinkedIn and Indeed, etc., for looking for interns. But if you're you want to get ahead of the other students, etc., I would say give yourself 6 to 7 months before the month that you want to start. So the term that you want to start. So if you're thinking about summer, then what I usually recommend is you start looking for internships on LinkedIn, etc., in November or October, end of October, just because there is a good chunk of companies that tend to hire early because they are very in demand companies. For example, like say Dropbox is what I've noticed is they'll open early and they'll close early and they'll be full. Okay, and they won't open again because usually even when they're full, they'll have a list of candidates, like a wait list of candidates that if someone drops out, they just take them and they'll be just closed indefinitely. But yeah, so that's what I usually recommend. But at the end of the day, even if you haven't started now and you're thinking about, maybe I want to do an internship this summer, you can still there's still many internships out there. There's many companies, small, big, that are always looking to hire interns. And the worst case scenario that is usually what happens is that you apply, you might go through the interview phase. They might say, "Oh, our summer cohort, summer class is full. Can you come back for fall?" That's probably the worst case scenario that will happen is they'll ask you to come back for fall, which is still amazing to be honest. Like myself, I'm when I applied for NVIDIA, I was initially interviewing for the fall term, and they said, "Hey, we found a better candidate. Can you come back for winter?" I said, "Sure, yeah, why not?" And right now, even though I have school in winter, I said, "No, there's no issue. I'll do the internship and do school at the same time. There's no problem with that." But you want to be careful. I don't recommend it. I usually recommend checking with the company that you apply for before you take school and internship together. Usually, what my recommendation is just focus on the internship, enjoy the internship. You don't need to have that stress of school, assignments, exams, etc. on top of your head. Um, But yeah, if you're thinking about internships for the summer or even for the fall, now is the time you start applying. For the fall, especially, you really want to start looking at it now and seeing okay what companies are hiring for the fall, etc. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions, add-ons?
I just wanted to add on that, like Jeremy put in the chat, that it's never too late to start applying. Like there might be better times to start applying, but there's never a bad time to apply. So, like if you're looking right now at positions in the summer and you're thinking, oh well, I'm not 6 to 7 months early, still apply. Like what Abdul said, the worst that could happen is that they defer your application, or that you still end up gaining some really good interview experience and industry experience when you do the interview. So make sure that you're applying for the jobs that you're interested in as well. Like it is a numbers game, but at the end of the day, you do want a position that you think you're going to enjoy. And I think we pretty much hit most of the information about.
Yeah, there's one more thing that I want to add. Like, there's a company that you think their stuff is really cool and you really want to work for them, but you didn't see anything about internships online. Just email them.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, companies love passionate people, and they want people to be engaged. For example, like for a bunch of jobs or for a bunch of like interviews, I they didn't have like a careers page, or they weren't hiring interns, and I just emailed a recruiter or I emailed their like company address, and I was like, hey, I'm really passionate, I really enjoy what you do, I'm really interested, can we just have a chat? And then not always, but sometimes it turns into an interview, and then it always and then sometimes it works out.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so Zane said, I know co-op says you can't, but can we negotiate salaries?
Yes. Yes, you for sure can.
You want to negotiate salaries, but if you're in co-op, you want to do it at a very fine line that co-op doesn't get any hint that you did it. Okay, you can do it. You can talk to your recruiter or whoever you're in communications with from the company, and you can negotiate the salary with them. But you want to make sure that there's no information that goes to co-op saying that you negotiated the salary. Yeah.
What Jeremy said, they might get upset.
Exactly. They might get upset, might get booted out of co-op, which is a W. No, I'm joking. So you want to be you want to be very cautious when you do it, and you will usually want to do it once you get your offer. So when you get a verbal confirmation that they want to bring you on, etc., and you get that first offer letter, it'll tell you all the information that you'll get paid this much, etc. That's the moment that you can look at it, ask yourself questions like, can I live off of this? Is this enough to sustain rent in the city, etc., and then decide what's a nice number to move up to that works for me and works for the company.
Absolutely.
Relocation packages usually are set in stone, from what I know, and it depends on the distance of relocation packages.
It might also differ from location, because I know for Microsoft, like US relocation packages are much better than Canadian offers.
Yes. So yeah, it depends on location, where you're moving to. What does the cost of living look like wherever that might be. Usually, relocation packages are, as far as I know, set in stone. You can't really interview them, change them up. The only things that I know, the only two values that you can change is your salary or your pay, and maybe your sign-on bonus. But usually, relocation packages are set by the HR for specific locations, so it's pretty tough to negotiate those.
Yeah, I've heard of stories, and I have friends who have negotiated higher relocation packages, but it's for sure very rare, and it's not easy.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Anyone have any questions before we move on? Yes, no, or forever hold your peace.
Or just ask later.
Yeah.
or that. Yeah, do that too. or at any point during this, that's fine as well. So moving on to how do I get an interview at XYZ company? How did Layla get an interview at Microsoft and I didn't? How did Ryan get an interview at Nvidia? I didn't. How did
You did,
how did
though.
Abdul how did
Abdul,
Abdul
you
get
work
an
at NVIDIA.
how did Abdul get an interview at Nvidia and I didn't, etc. So usually when it comes to these types of topics, what I'll usually tell, and I'm being truthfully honest, is it's really RNG. And by RNG means it's a lot of it is on luck, but a lot of it also depends on your expertise, your skill set, your resume, and how much effort you've put into looking. How hungry are you for that position? When I applied to NVIDIA itself, like I said, it was for a fall term. So I was looking, and I was looking for positions in the fall, and I was applying everywhere, left, right, center. So LinkedIn, every single day, checking on LinkedIn, applying to interviews, and one day a recruiter, which I thought was a rejection, believe it or not, reached out because I had "thank you for applying," and I was like, okay, great, another rejection, and then lo and behold, it asked me for an interview. So I think the biggest thing is if you want to work at one of these big companies, is that you need to really put yourself out there. You really want to make sure everything that you can provide to that company, so like your resume, your portfolio, etc., the best of the best it can be at. You don't want them to see any flaws in you, so that you get that you get that interview and you crush that interview. Regardless if it's a small company, if it's your dream company, if it's a big company, etc. So for me, my experience was that I, like many others, applied to the job on their career site. No referrals, no, you know, no one really helped me. I just took my resume, put it in their Workday parser, put my information in, and applied to a bunch of positions that they have. I got rejected by all the positions except for one, which I'm working now. So it just really shows you that yes, the process will get tiring at time, and you'll feel like, am I ever going to get an interview, or am I ever, is this really worth it? Trust me, it is worth it, because I know people now that are finishing bachelors like myself, and it took them almost a year just to find a job because they didn't have any interview experience. Now, I'm not saying you need to have internships to get a full-time job. You can definitely get internships and full-time offers regardless of having prior experience, but it definitely does help. So I would say definitely you need to, whatever term you're looking for, you need to really, prepare yourself that a lot of work is going to be put in term on my end. And at the end of the day, the rest is not in my hands. Once the resume is gone, it's gone into the recruiter's hands. It's now up to them or up to the hiring manager to really decide if they want to, you know, move this application forward or not. Um, and yeah, so my process was, luckily my application was liked by hiring manager, and one thing led to another, and I'm at that company now. And I guess Layla and Ryan can talk about their experiences as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I've already. You go.
It's all good. Yeah, so I definitely agree that it's a mix of expertise, your resume, but it's also very much luck. For me, I definitely think I lucked out. Microsoft was actually the second company I applied for, and the second one that I interviewed for. So I applied actually back in October, which per co-op standards, I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't supposed to, but I say apply anyways. Also, don't reject yourself from the job by not applying. Like if you see a good opportunity, you're not going to lose anything by asking, like Ryan mentioned, if it's just an email that you're going to send, or by applying. The worst that can happen is they say no. So I applied back in October, and it was actually a pretty long process. I didn't hear back about a first interview until I think November, and that was an initial phone screen. So it was just an HR rep who asked some pretty basic technical questions and just behavioral questions, getting to know me a bit better. And then it was another 2 to 3 weeks after that until I had my final round interviews, which were scheduled for the beginning of January. And then I didn't know until mid-January. So it was a pretty long process, I think from October to January. And this position is for the summer. So I wasn't really sure, like, to be completely honest. I started moving on. Like Abdul said, you send in your information, you send in your application, and then you just move on. You go on to the next one. If you dwell on it too much, it's not going to be very healthy, and it won't be. It's not really beneficial to kind of dwell on it. So I kept applying, but then I heard back, and then I stopped applying. But I think another thing to mention is the best time to apply for a job is if you already have one, because then you already know kind of the expectations, you know what you're worth too, and you're able to make some better decisions. So applying, well, now it's too early, but for the next fall and winter semesters for sure, to keep that in mind. For my experience, also, I think it was similar to what Abdul said. So I didn't have any referrals. I didn't know any recruiters beforehand. I think just being really transparent throughout the whole process, being personable. I think something that I wanted to mention about behavioral interviews is to jot down the recruiter's name, because I almost forgot to do that. But just, calling them by their name, saying, oh, like, hi, Lauren, it was great talking to you, and then at the end, thanking them for their time. If I remember correctly, I think Ryan has a pretty sick resume template, if it's not already
Thank
in.
you.
Yeah.
It's pinned in the Careers and Co-op Internships channel.
Everyone should definitely check that out, because it's a great way to kind of have your thoughts all laid out to prepare for the interview. And I think at the very top is the recruiter's name, which is a great touch.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that was just kind of my experience. I took a chance on myself, and I think Microsoft also gave me an opportunity. I still get rejection emails to this day for positions that I applied like 6 months ago now. And like from companies smaller than Microsoft. So every company is looking for something specific. It's not really it's not a uniform standard that everyone's looking for. It's the luck of the draw, and whatever company is going to take a chance on you and see something in you that has potential. So don't lose hope and just keep applying, I guess.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on something a bit more different about how to get interviews. And the big one is, if you don't have, experience, the big one is projects.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, not everyone can get a job at big company Y, but everyone can make projects. Everyone has the ability to do that. And the projects have to stand out in some way. Everyone can create like a simple CRUD app and like a to-do list app. But, if you make it unique and make it your own, give it a cool, fun name, and, really highlight aspects about it on your resume, it'll look pretty good. For example, I've had very basic, what is essentially a CRUD app with a few extra aspects to it, but you really make it sound good. You use like those fancy, fun keywords, like deployed on AWS or stuff like that, like collaborated with multiple different people and stuff like that. You really want to make it sound good. And on top of that, like projects give you experience. They give you experience that I would say is, invaluable, or the most valuable. I don't know the term there, but the most valuable that you can get is through projects. Because at the end of the day, projects are practicing, what we're doing, and practice makes perfect. So I think it's really important to make projects, and make projects about things that you're actually passionate about, things that you actually want to do for a living and as a job. So I think it's important.
Sure. Yeah, I did want to add on to that. If this applies to anyone, the very first thing on my resume, or some versions of my resume, was my research experience. So if anyone's working with a prof or looking into something like that, that does count as experience, especially if you have anything to do with computer science, data analytics, whatever it is. My research experience was actually using Power BI and data analysis, but I was applying for a software engineering position. So it really just depends on a lot of factors, but any experience that you think is valuable, anything that was a learning experience too that you can speak about, whether that's a project like Ryan mentioned, or research experience, or a volunteer experience that you had, I think they can all work really well.
Yeah, I think everything's been nailed on the coffin. We have around 5 minutes left. If anyone has any other questions that they'd like to ask, regardless of, the topic, careers, or about the talk that we just gave, feel free to ask. I'm always open to help as well if you guys need any help with resumes, preparation, interview prep, etc. So feel free to DM me or at me in the careers chat, and I will help. Good way to research on a small/mid-sized company.
That's a good question.
Usually, so what I'll do if I'm looking at a small mid-sized company is I'll go to their about page, and usually every company will have an about page, and I will note down everything that I think is key to know about that company. So like their values, what type of company is it, like, maybe see if they talk about projects that they've done, etc. And um, really note down that. Then obviously, I'd just do a Google search on them, which will probably maybe redirect you to a Glassdoor, like Jeremy said, yep. And then utilize the information on Glassdoor as well about that company, etc.
Yeah, to build on that, like it depends on the company.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's a startup that has gone through like a big startup incubator like Y Combinator, you can look through Y Combinator. I call it YC. You can look through YC's website because normally they have like more detailed information about the startup while they were at YC. So you could look through about like their mission statement, what they like to do, what they don't like to do, key people in the company, their LinkedIns, and you can go through stuff like that. Yeah.
Another question that was asked: does
yeah.
dress code matter for online interviews? Yes, it does. Now you can wear whatever you want as your
Just look
pants.
presentable. Yeah.
Just make sure you look presentable. You have a dress shirt. You don't need to have a tie. I usually just have a dress shirt on, and I'll usually do my interviews just in a dress shirt. You want to look at least a little bit professional in the sense that you've taken a shower, your hair is combed, you have a nice shirt on, etc. So that they know you came prepared. You're professional, you're punctual, you're on time, etc. So please don't come in your PJs with
unless they're just the bottom half.
Yeah. Think of it in the sense like if I was to call you into office and you're gonna have an interview on site, would you dress the same way for that on-site interview the same way you dress for the online interview, excluding the pants? Okay, you don't.
Yeah.
Unless if they ask you to stand up, then I don't know. But they usually don't. Okay, so
that'd be a nice
yeah.
screening question.
Yeah.
Can you stand up for us? And then that's how you get the job.
But yeah. Any other questions, guys? Anyone else have anything to add? If not, then I think we're good. I'll give you guys 2 minutes back. Take care and hope you enjoyed.
To add something, if you ever need any questions or answers or whatever, just put them in the careers chat. Somebody will answer. We're always around.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Have a nice night.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Wait.